let's get into it. Last year, so if you haven't heard these numbers, I think they're important numbers to throw out there. Last year, Pelotonia raised $27.4 million, and in the last 10 years, a little over $184 million. Easy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One donation at a time.
Right, exactly. $1 at a time, and it's so those are actually when you step back from those numbers. And do you ever get a chance to step back from those numbers and go, "Holy cow, that's like an incredible amount of money, right?
Yeah.
In a year, and then over a decade, that's pretty significant."
Yeah, it's remarkable, and it's a testament to the community and thousands and thousands of people who participate and solicit contributions and are engaged in the mission. I think what's really interesting is that if you think about the 27.4 million, it was over 165,000 donations from all 50 states and 62 countries, and which your team at AWH knows really well. And so this is not simply a local thing. I mean, yes, it's an event that takes place in Columbus, and 80% of our riders are from Ohio, but the donations and that money is coming from all over. I think last year was about 40% of the money came from outside of Ohio. And so that model of just distributed democratic philanthropy is pretty cool. I mean, the average donation last year, I think, and this is skewed, the average donation was in the $77 range. Now, that's skewed by a couple very large donations, so it probably would be even smaller if you remove those. And so, to me, that's the most fascinating thing, is not the total dollars, but it's the number of people that are behind those dollars.
And there is a incredible community behind it that makes it happen, from the corporate partners that allow 100% of the money raised to go to cancer research, to the volunteers, to the team at Pelotonia. Most people probably don't know the team, because you think about 27.4 million and 184 million over 10 years, and you think, wow, well, Pelotonia must have a massive team and operation behind that, and that's not the case. And so talk about the team, if you would, a little bit, because I'm not sure the team gets as much airtime as they ultimately probably deserve and should get.
They deserve way more than they get, and I appreciate you asking that or commenting that. We are very lucky. I mean, to have this 100% model is very unique, and it's a huge asset for us, because it's just a really powerful commitment when you can say to somebody that every single dollar you contribute is going directly to research. That's not to say, let me be clear, that other organizations that don't have a 100% model aren't extremely important and don't do great work. And I don't like that comparison, because I hear it all too often. People say, oh, well, I'm going to give to Pelotonia because it's 100%. That's this myth of overhead, and we can get into that later if you want. But anyway, we're very fortunate to have that, and our team is small, and they are incredible, and they have the privilege of working on this mission, but they also have the privilege of collaborating with our corporate partners and so many organizations in the community that extend our reach. So thousands of volunteers, and you name it, we're fortunate to have it. The one thing I would say is we also have a board that is extremely entrepreneurial, and they think really big. And so I'll tell you one example of that is when Pelotonia started, they came up with a 5-year pro forma. And they said, what do you think we can raise, and how many riders will it take, and all these things. And the 5-year projection was that they would raise up to $50 million. And most people at the time thought that was crazy. And one of our board members, I wasn't here at the time, but one of the board members who's still on the board, we just actually had a meeting the last few hours, said to the team, let's start big and get bigger. And she always says that. And she always says that because she says for so many organizations, they start really small. And it's hard to start small and get really big. And if it wasn't for that sort of way of thinking, where they said, look, let's go get the corporate funding, let's think about the big audacious goals, and guess what? If we come up short, we'll still have gone beyond what we thought was possible. And so I feel very humbled to work for an organization that pushes us to think big. In fact, in the meeting we just had, one of our board members, who may or may not run a very large bank, said, when we were talking about revenue, and I'll make up the numbers, but he said, why are you talking about raising 30 million? And he always does this at every meeting. He says, if you set the goal at 30 and you raise 31, you're going to be really happy. He said, if you set the goal at 35 and raise 34, you're going to be disappointed, but you'll have raised $3 million more. And so they're always sort of
just
setting us
hate
up.
mental, manipulation like that?
Some days I do. I like to under-promise and over-deliver. He likes us to over-promise and then try to deliver, which is not easy.
So, is it okay if I mention Root and the fact that you're on the board of Root? I mean, that's not like a secret, right? So how do you balance, the think big, start big, get bigger with, and obviously Root's, a massively successful, fast-growing, company in Columbus. So this is not a great analogy to them, but most organizations, for-profit, non-profit, do start out initially with lots of constraints, maybe very few resources, right? Still probably is trying to solve really big problems. So how do you sort of balance the fact that not everybody starts and launches something with the kinds of connections and relationships that were a part of Pelotonia at the beginning and still are?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think one key element to Pelotonia that often gets overlooked, and the example I would give you is we get calls pretty much every week from organizations, hospitals, cancer centers, universities across the country who sort of want to replicate this in their area. And what they see is they see the revenue, and they see how exciting the revenue could be. But what they don't see are the actual characteristics that have made it successful. And one of those that I think is really important is the brand. What they don't understand is how to create, or the importance of creating, a culturally relevant brand. And I always want to give credit to my predecessors at the organizations because they did that, right? So if Pelotonia was called, the bike ride across Columbus, you wouldn't be wearing that shirt.
Probably not.
And I don't say that because there aren't other organizations that have great names or whatever.
Bike rides across from Columbus aren't cool.
Well, no, it's not that they're not cool. It's that they didn't have the luxury maybe, or the resources, or didn't think about the value of creating a culturally relevant brand. And we're fortunate to have that, right? We get calls every week from realtors who say, I was showing somebody around a neighborhood from out of town, and they said, what are all the green arrows? And it created this curiosity where people wanted to know, why are these on cars? Why are there yard signs? What Easton or the airport or whatever it might be? And so creating a culturally relevant brand, whether it's Pelotonia, whether it's Root, whatever it might be, it can create a value that goes way beyond the infrastructure. So we have a small team, but people assume that it's so much bigger because the brand is so prevalent and pervasive in the community. And so I think that's one of the things that's really helped us. And quite honestly, it's also a huge challenge in the next decade. How do you stay relevant? How do you make sure that brand stays fresh as you get older?
Why do you think the brand is magnetic? Why do people drive around with 10 arrows, magnetic decal arrows on the back of their cars, right?
Yeah, so a few reasons. I think there's a positive and a negative to this. The positive is people want to be engaged in something bigger than themselves, and I think that's human nature, right? We all want to be a part of something special and something that we can't do on our own. I think the negative part of it that inures to our benefit, unfortunately, is that everybody's been touched by cancer, right? So we have a cause that is relevant, right? Every single person has a story that's unique to them and to their family, and everybody wants to do something about it. And I think Pelotonia came along at a time when people were sort of wondering, what can I do? What can I do? It wasn't that people loved to ride bikes. It wasn't that people loved spandex. It wasn't that, they wanted to be a part of something special. And in fact, 70% of our riders say they didn't own a bike prior to signing up for Pelotonia. Now, they may have become exercise enthusiasts or fanatic cyclists over time, but that's not why they joined. They joined because they wanted to be a part of a community and they wanted to do something something that was empowering related to this disease.
So you mentioned the other cancer hospitals and research organizations reaching out to talk about whether something Pelotonia-like makes sense for them. Do you think, given the fact that it's not just about the dollars that get raised, it's about the the brand. It's about the execution, right, and the discipline and all of the details inside of the organization, certainly inside of the event. Two-part question. Could it happen someplace other than Columbus, or is this a unique circumstance of model and people and organizations that continue to drive it forward here to make it work? And if it can work somewhere else, are you guys interested in that, and does that make sense?
Great questions, things we think about every day. So the answer to the first one is yes, it can work. It has not worked to the scale that we've seen over the first decade of Pelotonia. So we are very open with our model. We actually have, we didn't do it this year, but the last few years we've had something called Pelotonia University, where other organizations, hospitals, cancer centers have come to Columbus for 2 days, and we've sort of said, here's how we do it. Because frankly, if they can go back and do it.
And then they run away scared?
Well, a lot of them do. And so we had everybody from the American Heart Association, diabetes, cancer hospitals, and again, they see the revenue. The number one thing that typically gets them to turn away is when we tell them we have 3,200 volunteers. And what I find oftentimes is their frame of reference is a 5K. Every city has 5K, every hospital has 5K, and 3.1 miles is a lot different than 100 miles. When you're talking about safety and road closures and all the things that come with it. And so that's what they don't understand typically until they come and visit or we talk to them. But again, if the American Heart Association goes away and starts a ride that raises a lot of money for heart disease, that's awesome. Like we don't think we own this space by any stretch. There are rides that have sprung up in the last few years that are working. There's one in Miami. It's associated with the Miami Dolphins. They started in the parking lot at the stadium. Goes down the beach in Miami. I think last year they raised $5.5 million in their fifth year.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's a little humid, but
I hope they're doing it in like January.
I think it's February, but yeah.
Good.
But as an example, they called after their fifth ride and they said, "Well, we're so disappointed." And I said, "Why are you disappointed? You just raised $5.5 million." And they said, "Well, it's not what you guys are doing." I said, it's not a fair comparison. So I think to your point, I don't think Pelotonia would be as successful if it had started in another place. Columbus has a very rich history of investing in the community. We have some of the best cultural amenities in the country and the world. And for a city that people have often not thought of at that scale or that level, it's pretty remarkable. When you think about whether it's Franklin Park or whether it's COSI or whether it's the zoo, and then you layer in that we have, the largest children's research hospital in the country now. We have the largest Ronald McDonald House. We have, one of the largest Komen events in the country. We have one of the largest Pride parades coming up this weekend. You could just go on and on and on. And what that speaks to is community involvement, corporate and civic philanthropy over decades. And so there is something unique here that has sort of come together. And the last point, and then I'll stop answering your question, but the last point is we also have this incredible cancer hospital, which is the third largest in North America and is world-class and treats tens of thousands of patients every year. So you think about the families and individuals who've been treated there who want to do something to support it. And so you take all of that together and you add in the 100% model, which is super transparent because on the way here I drove past the buildings where those dollars go and the researchers were still there. It's a very linear story, and that combination I don't think exists in too many places. So then quickly, your second question, would we ever do it in another city? The answer is yes, but only under the right circumstances, and we have yet to find them. So we've been approached by several cities, two at the moment that we're talking to, and we've given them a checklist. And we've said, if you can come back with commitments to meet all of these characteristics, then we'll go to the next phase of discussion. And so far, they haven't been able to do it. It's things like getting corporate support for the operations, but also corporate support to drive ridership. And so I'll give you, just to be open, Atlanta came to us, Emory came to us. There's a lot of docs from the James who are now at Emory, so they understand what it takes. They're excited about it. And we said, great, Atlanta's awesome. You got Home Depot, you got Delta, you got CNN, you got Coca-Cola. You got all these huge companies. Just go get 3 of them to commit to underwrite the operations and drive ridership. and they haven't been able to do it yet. Doesn't mean they won't, but there are certain things that we wouldn't want to risk the brand by going to a place without having the right characteristics in place.
Yeah. So, 11th year. I mean, there is now a foundation. There's a there's a model, but how is each year, a little bit different? And I'm assuming each year takes on a little bit of its own flavor. Clearly, the goal goes up every year from a fundraising perspective. So you guys can't just say, okay, well, let's just do what we did last year and that'll be good enough, because it probably won't be. I know you've been running around the last couple of weeks for sure, if not, month or two, now meeting with the corporate partners, driving their engagement, getting them plugged in, getting them excited about this 11th year. How hard is it to sort of get the flywheel spinning every year to get everybody re-engaged?
It's really hard. I mean, this is my 5th year here. I've never worked in a situation where it literally goes to zero and it's like, hey, congratulations, start over. I mean, think about that. And I'll give you another example, because I know there's people here that work in startups and understand this. And this, I'll be curious to know what you all think. But if I had to ask you, what do you think the year-over-year rider retention is? So what percentage of riders from 2018, well, we'll do 17 to 18, but from 2017 to 2018, do you think participated as riders? 47? Okay. 95, 25, and 47. All right. Anybody else? Okay, so from 2017 to 2018, it was 62%. That was up from 59% the year before. Okay, so the reason I say that is that means that every year, if you had a business and you had to go get 40% new customers every year, think about that. If you were selling software, if you're, that's not easy. The good news is that we've benefited tremendously from the growth trajectory of Columbus. So if you think about 10 years ago in Columbus and where it is now and where it will be in 10 more years, so I'll give you an example. I just reviewed this with our board. We have as of today, we have 41 new Pelotons this year. Now that might be 5 people, it might be 7 people, it might be 9 people, but that's 41 new groups, 31 of which are companies. So think about all the new companies that have sprung up in the last year or 2 or 3, and so we're benefiting from that. So it's a challenge, because the challenge is actually not whether everybody comes back to ride. The challenge is whether people stay engaged, right? People have a wedding, they've got family trip, they're going to be out of town, whatever it is. As long as they're staying, quote, in the family, they're making a donation, they're buying a T-shirt, they're volunteering some way or shape, that's fine. We just don't want to lose people sort of to the universe. But it's a challenge. And I will say this, it's a challenge also because things happen in the business community, right? So, I mean, on our Slack channels, the things that get shared the fastest are so-and-so lays off 200 people. And it's immediately like, oh my gosh, did any of our riders, did any of our volunteers, like what's the impact of that? The flip side of that is that when that happens, a lot of those people land at other companies. And so then we get advocates in new places. Right. And so it's sort of a...
Thankfully, Root's going to hire like 10,000 people. So,
but I'm conflicted, so I can't tell them that they have to participate. But that's a good example, right? So a Root Insurance didn't exist 3 years ago. Last year, I think they had 17 riders, and this year they're going to have 50 or 60. So, they weren't here. Right. And so and there are tons of examples like that. So from year to year, you just never know. But I would say this, the other thing that we're sort of evolving towards is I don't think the metric for Pelotonia should be riders in dollars. It has been that historically. But if we raise $25 million this year instead of $28 million, it's what is happening with the 25. How many clinical trials, how many young investigators, how many new therapies get delivered to people? Like, that's what we should be measuring. It's a much harder thing to communicate. But the reality is, if I tell you we raised 27 or 35 million, it doesn't tell you the impact. It's just a number.
Well, yeah, the community is just assuming at that point, because of the brand trust, that $27 million is going to good, impactful, significant work, right?
Right.
And you and I have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years talking about, well, how do you tell the impact story better of the actual clinical trials and research that's going on? And, frankly, some of that stuff is very clinically, right, driven and very scientific. And it's kind of hard to put a wrapper around that and tell that in an understandable, interesting way.
Yeah, exactly. And so historically, again, the way that the funding has worked is that until we raised the money, they couldn't commit the money, right? So year one, there was $4.5 million raised, and everybody said, oh my God, what are we going to do with this money? It was so much money. And then it was 7 million, and then it was 9 million, and then it was 13 million, then and so it made it hard for the research enterprise to actually plan, because they didn't want to overcommit, and then what happens if the money didn't get raised? And so now we're at a point where it's more predictable, right? So we could have a down year one year, but it's not going to zero, right? So, if it goes from 27 to 30, or it goes 27 to 24, it's still 24 million or still $30 million. And so we actually just had a board meeting, and the vast majority of the meeting was focused on this new project that we're about to announce, which is a $100 million commitment. And in fact, I drove right by, there will be a new building for this new Institute of Immuno-Oncology that will require a $100 million commitment from Pelotonia. So we're now at a point where we can make these forward commitments and say to the community, the reason we really need you to ride and raise and volunteer for the next 5 years is because we're going to build this new institute, and it'll be the best in the world. And oh, by the way, it might come with a new building on this new West Campus at Kenny and Lane that will be a place for the community to go and experience what they've enabled. And so 5 years ago, we couldn't have done that. 2 years ago, we couldn't have done that. But that, to me, is really exciting, because then we're telling a prospective story as opposed to coming every year to the community and saying, last year you raised this, and we were able to fund these 32 scientists or whatever it might have been. It'll be a much more compelling thing.
Yeah, it's a forward-looking, right, future plan versus, hey, you raised a good amount of money, raise a bit more this year, and then we'll be happy, right?
And because, look, a decade in, you deal with donor fatigue, you deal with sort of all kinds of things that some of which we can anticipate, some of which we can't. And so we've got the narrative has to shift, and it goes back to keeping the brand relevant, right? So how do we keep the brand relevant in a way that's highlighting the impact of the money that's been raised?
And speaking of keeping the brand relevant, and sort of re-energizing the brand and the organization every year, you had new routes, right, to the ride event. You sort of change up, how people that have been riding for a long time and have been long-time supporters, how they get to sort of engage in the ride versus people that are first year, et cetera. So the experience is different. But ultimately, an event-centric organization is an event-centric organization that has scalability limitations, right? So is Pelotonia always going to be an event-centric organization, or does it begin to move beyond that in some way over the next 11 years?
It's a good question. It's interesting because I don't see us as an event-centric organization, but the vast majority of people do. And that's been a real challenge for me personally, because people who've participated in the event understand that it's so much more, right? It's this emotional experience, this community connectivity. Like, it's not a bike race. It's not just a bike ride. Even my own wife, who, she doesn't like riding her bike. Like, that's not what she likes to do for fun or exercise. But she loves riding in Pelotonia because it's just this journey and it's this sort of emotional experience. And so if you've participated, you know that. And if you haven't, you don't. And so it's sort of like, how do we communicate that to people? And so one of the biggest funnels for new riders is volunteers. Because volunteers come out and they experience that emotion and that community building, and then they say, you know what, I could do that, or I want to try that. So the challenge is, how do you communicate that effectively? And it will always be a huge component of what we do, But our goal is to expand the opportunities for people to be involved. So whether that's merchandise expansion, whether that's using technology, whatever it might be, how can people who will never be in Columbus the first weekend in August, or who may never want to get on a bike, how can they still be a part of this? And so I think that's the ultimate challenge. And at the same time, how can the event experience be the best of the best? Because, you know, again, are you going to ride year after year after year if it's the same experience? You're not. And so every year we have to change certain things and improve certain things. And the goal ultimately is when somebody finishes their experience at the weekend, that they're just immediately like, how could I not do this again? I want to do this again.
Like, I think this is accurate for last year's event. You guys added socks, right? Because riders were saying that there was a period after they were done riding, right, where they you know, and they don't want to keep their riding sneakers on or shoes, right? And but they were going into flip flops, but there was like a transition period where they were in bare feet, you know, et cetera, right? So something like that is a very small detail, but in the end, the experience probably just around adding socks to the equation probably magnified the experience tenfold.
Right. And my sort of flaw is that I think everything's easy, and I have no idea how challenging most things are. So that was an example where I just said, let's make flip-flops, custom flip-flops, and give them to everybody. I mean, you know, we don't exactly have the sizes for 8,500 people, and then you got people trading them in, and, you know, but to me it was like, let's just make flip-flops. Let's just get one of the retailers in town to make us flip-flops. You know, like, not so easy.
There has to be a flip-flop machine nearby, right?
Right. So that's one of the challenges is like, what can we actually do? I'll give you two other examples where, again, I'm the least knowledgeable about what really is possible. You know, I thought we should just start a lot more routes. We've had requests to have routes from like Akron down to Gambier or Cleveland or, you know, all over. And I said to the team, let's just start more routes. And they were like, we can't. And I'm like, what do you mean we can't? Of course we can. There's roads, there's people, there's stuff. And they said, we can't find any more police officers who want to work. We have police officers who drive in to work the weekend from all over the state. And so if we start another route, we're the longest ride in the country now that has an officer at every intersection. So you think about that. Every intersection over 100 miles on Saturday and 100 miles on Sunday now has an officer. It's August, it's hot. These officers can work overtime like any other event all year round, so they don't need this to support themselves. And so, you know, I would have never thought about that, right? Another example is 2 years ago, I said we were about to do a deal with a new corporate sponsor from outside of Columbus. And we were pitching them, and I said to our team, I said, I want the best drone footage of the ride. I mean, I want it like right above them. I want to show this company what this is all about. And our head of operations and safety came to me and said, we can't do it. I said, what do you mean you can't do it? He said, you have all these people out on the road. They're going to be looking up at this drone, and they're going to bump into each other. And I said to him, okay, then get a helicopter. And he said, and he's so right. I mean, again, this is why he's great at what he does. He said, Doug, you don't understand. When people see a helicopter on a route like that, they think it's a life flight. And then they start whispering, somebody got hurt, somebody's going to the hospital, and it creates this like, and so, you know, again, it's easy to come up with great ideas, and then I like to have people who balance me with practicality.
Let's talk about pull. So you have taken the brand, or at least a brand extension with the Pull app, so that you don't have to participate in the ride, right? Necessarily to raise money. Talk about the Pull strategy. Why do it? Are you happy with the progress? And you know, where does that sort of fit into things moving forward?
Yeah, so we launched this Pull app about a year ago, and the idea was just that. It was initially, it came from the fact that so many of our corporate partners based in Columbus had tens of thousands of employees across the country and around the world who didn't feel connected. They couldn't fly here, they couldn't be here for the event, they weren't sure how to engage. And so that's where the idea initially came from. Let's build something where they can ride, or originally it was all riding, now it's got all kinds of different exercise activities, but something where they can be tied into the cause. And it has worked very well in certain circumstances. It's been very energizing for people. It's helped us broaden the community in a real way. I mean, thousands of people who wouldn't otherwise be engaged are now engaged. The one area where it hasn't worked well is that the premise behind it was you could earn money that was set aside by these corporations or individuals. So if every mile you walk or run or swim or whatever it is, or every minute, you would be earning these micro sort of donations. And that has worked really well. What hasn't worked as well, and it's our responsibility to figure this out, is how do you use it for peer-to-peer fundraising? So the idea was after you exercise, you could text the link to your friends, and literally with Apple Pay or Google Pay, they could just use their thumbprint, and they could add 50 cents or $1 or $3. And it was like, how could we get thousands of people donating $1 or $2, and these things would add up over time if you had ultimately hundreds of thousands of people walking every day or running or cycling indoor, outdoor, et cetera. That's the piece that we haven't converted to yet. So we're doing a bunch of things now to try to convert people to what we call boosting, which is giving people these sort of micro donations. So we're focused on that right now to figure it out. But it has added a lot of energy and a lot of opportunity for, again, riders who are here to share with their donors, to share with people who know of the brand but haven't figured out a way to engage. So we're optimistic about that.
So Doug's already a big-time celebrity in town, but there was this Power 100 list that came out, and Doug, not surprisingly, found himself on the Power 100 list in Columbus. So. Not that you needed any, your ego to get any bigger.
Or embarrassment.
Congratulations for that. That's good.
That's very nice. It was very humbling, and like I said earlier, Pelotonia's success is a direct, it's just directly related and correlated to the generosity of so many people. So it's nice that I get recognized, but it's not about me. And if it ever becomes about me, the organization's in trouble.
So if you don't know Doug very well, he is a very humble and genuinely kind person. So I only say that, half kiddingly.
I did get a lot of.
I'm sure you got a lot of messages. Yeah.
Internally I got a lot of.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, because the team knows all the, apparently all the crazy, shitty ideas that you come up with.
Exactly.
Right.
They know the truth. Exactly. They're like, power. What? No, it was again, it's a reflection on how this community feels about Pelotonia, and that's awesome.
So everybody may not know your background pre-Pelotonia, and so it's probably worth taking a minute to sort of talk about why you care about it, and why is this the right place for you, and the right place for you to be applying your craft and putting your time and energy into.
Yeah, I mean, so the short story is I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 19, and I was going into my sophomore year of college. I was a student athlete and, never dreamt of having cancer, never dreamt of being sick, had never been sick a day in my life, never been to a hospital. I mean, you name it, it was a shock. And I was studying to be a teacher, actually, and was going to coach soccer and teach, and I love being around young people. And my life took a turn, as everybody's does at some point. And, almost 22 years later, I feel so fortunate and grateful for the opportunity I've had to work in this space for the last 22 years. And I've gotten to see a lot of interesting things, but the one theme throughout my career has been, how do you build community? Like, how do you bring people together? And whether that was through the organization I started in my dorm room that was focused on young adults with cancer, or whether that was at the Livestrong Foundation where I was previously, it was all about, like, how do you bring people together? And that, to me, is the beauty of Pelotonia. Again, we have unlimited potential. And I'll never forget, when I moved here, we had, 6,000 riders at the time. And somebody said to me, well, the market's saturated. And I said, well, aren't there 1.9 million people in Central Ohio? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, the market's not saturated. We have.
Not very good at math, but those numbers seem to be different.
1.85 million people who have not ridden, or have not participated. And so, the challenge, what I love to do is try to figure out how do you build community. And whether that's using technology in an app, or whether that's a bike ride, or whether that's any number of other things, I just come from a place where like I just feel really strongly that human nature is we want to be connected. And I feel like we live in a world where we are actually more isolated than we ever have been, even though we think we're connected. We're not connected. I mean, we have social media and all these tools and all these things, but like real connection, right? Really building community. And that's what you see when you come to Pelotonia weekend. You see, it's like a reunion. It's like a pilgrimage. People are excited to see each other again. The volunteers are ecstatic and thanking the riders. And like, it's a really uplifting thing. Take the cause aside, take, all the money aside. It's just like, it's the essence of who people are. And you just see great people doing great things that they didn't think were possible. And that's pretty cool.
Well, and whether it's Pelotonia on the patio, which just happened, or it's the Czech celebration, there is a level of engagement that is it's hard to quantify and to sort of put your finger on, right? Why people would show up for a Czech celebration, right? I mean, but it's kind of a fun party. I mean, the Czech celebration last year was this variety show of epic proportion of jump rope artists and drummers, and I'm leaving. There was a magician, and
there was too much going on. It was good, but it was interesting. It was a great experiment.
It was fun. I enjoyed it
Yeah.
because I sort of have ADHD, so the fact that there was a different act every 5 minutes was good for me. But the fact that people come out just for the reveal of how much money was raised, I think is a testament to how much people care about this organization.
Yeah, people are really proud, and they work hard. I mean, this is a unique model. I mean, we ask people to put their credit card down and say, I'm going to raise this much money. And so that's a huge commitment, and it's a huge accomplishment when they do it, and they deserve to celebrate. And I would also say that one of the core values of the brand is fun. I mean, this sounds silly, but we talk internally about if you do Pelotonia weekend correctly, if you do it correctly, you will not lose a pound, because there are plenty of food and plenty of beer, and like we want you to have fun because it's a celebration of months of hard work, right? So people are raising money. I mean, my daughter just did a handmade bracelet stand yesterday in our front yard, and I got this green one, and I mean, she raised like $37. Like, it's grassroots, and people want to celebrate and have fun and see each other. And the other thing that's really unique about Pelotonia is that the researchers who are funded have to participate. It's mandated. So when you apply for a grant, you check a box that says, if I'm funded, I will ride and raise money. And that creates a very different dynamic. It used to be 20 years ago that the advocacy community went out and did all the work and raised the money, and then the money was sent to that building over there, and I have no idea who's in that building. I have no idea what they do, but I trust that they're doing good work. And now you come out to Pelotonia, you see people wearing jerseys and shirts that say, my research is funded by you, and you can ride next to them or volunteer next to them. And these people, talk about humble. Every year there's a conversation that goes on the bike where somebody says to the person next to them, what do you do? And they go, I work at the university. Well, what do you do? I work at the medical center. What do you do? I do cancer research. And then it finally gets down to the point where it's like some world-class physician scientist who may be on the verge of a great breakthrough, but the community sees them as just like them and just a peer. And that's a really special dynamic as well.
Yeah, Barry from Storyforge does this whiskey tasting to raise money every year. So I've gone to it the last 2 years, and almost everybody except for me at his little whiskey tasting fundraiser last year was a researcher from OSU.
They were drinking?
They were-
That's awesome.
and well, we did it at the lab, so I'm sure it was fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they're very well. I guess if that's what you do, you don't think that much about it, right? I mean, you don't like think that it's that unique and that special that you are doing this research, because that's just what you do. I mean, that's what you signed up for.
Right, and what's amazing is when you get together for their peer review conferences where they're looking at these grants and trying to decide what to fund, one of the interesting things is the researchers who are on these review panels, they always start the session by saying, we raised this money too. Like, we don't have to give it out. unless these projects are the best of the best. And it just creates a different level of accountability because they are sending the emails and they're doing the bake sales and they're doing it just like everybody else. And so they take, I think, a little bit of extra pride in making sure that the projects that are funded are the best of the best because they feel a connection to the money that's been raised because they've done it.
Yeah. So I've got one other thing to say, and then we'll throw it out for questions. It was Doug's birthday the end of last week, so we typically don't have cupcakes. So Katie from our team got cupcakes and brought them in
That's
celebration
awesome.
of your
Thank
birthday.
you very much. That's so nice.
And
they had green on them, I saw.
she was also nice enough to snag you a card. So
that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Especially, so he literally came from a board meeting to come here and do this. So I appreciate you squeezing this in
This is
and
fun.
making time for it. So if you've got a question, raise your hand and we'll try to tackle it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we
You could repeat the
so
question,
the question
please.
was, are we doing things on campus to show people the impact of the research and not just the basic science, but sort of keeping people engaged and trying to do that? The answer is yes. We want to do way more of that than we are doing. Like as an example, one of the things we're doing now is there are weekly tours of the biomedical research tower where every Friday morning people can sign up to go tour and meet with an investigator and see what they're working on. The other thing that your question made me think of that I should mention is that we fund research across 14 of the colleges on campus. So it's not just basic science. So as an example, we funded research at the law school years ago that was looking at tobacco control research and policy related to tobacco control. So it's not just laboratory basic science. We funded a project, I believe, at the business school that was looking at how do you shrink the time that it takes to develop a new drug. So if new drugs take 10 years and $1 billion, well, imagine if we could get that 10 years to 7, and $700 million or whatever it might be. So we just funded a program on dance therapy that looked at whether cancer survivors who went through this intensive dance therapy program actually had better outcomes from their treatment. So a lot of things looking at long-term and late effects. So while the majority of it is in the lab and basic in nature, the more we can engage people with the research, the better. Oh, do we do it off campus? We've done things at our office before, and then we've done things at our events before, but not necessarily. I'm trying to think of what else we've done. I have to think about that. We would, though. Anything that we can, anytime we can deliver the impact and expose people to that, it's powerful, really powerful.
More of a comment from a rider's perspective of the gratification that a rider feels, and is there really a need to change it to keep the riders interested? Imagine that once a year you get on a bicycle and everywhere you go there are people along the sides that are saying thank you, that are praising you, that are clapping for you, and you ride into Granville and literally the streets are lined with people and you're going, I'm not important, I'm just riding a bicycle. So you think you would get bored if you had to do that once a year? Doesn't happen.
That's good to hear. I will tell you that the best part of my job is that we get incredible unsolicited advice. And sometimes you get the best ideas in the world, and sometimes you get just comments and feedback and things that you appreciate. And one of the hard things as we think about the next decade is there are a lot of different audiences. And so every year we do a survey of our riders and volunteers, and we get thousands of responses. And I'll give you just one example, but at the end of the survey, there's an open text field, and the survey takes like 30 minutes. I mean, it's a pretty in-depth look at what their experience was like. And at the end, there's all these open text fields, and we read all of them. Last year was 3,600 of them. And so sometimes you get comments, like one comment will be, the weather was perfect. And the next comment was, the weather was horrible. You know, and it's like, wait a minute, were we both at the same place on the same day? So 2 years ago, right. Well, it could say the food was spectacular, the food was terrible, you know, like one after another. So we have to sort of do some analysis. But 2 years ago, we were very fortunate that at our opening ceremony, we had Joe and Jill Biden come speak and tell the powerful story of losing his son, and it was remarkable. And that year, when we read the survey results, there were 2 people in the open text field, unrelated to each other, because we checked, that both wrote, "It was so great having Bill Clinton at the opening ceremony." Okay, so when we read that, our team was like, "See, we get everything," you know. It's like, okay, well, they both have white hair, they're both former politicians, but one talked about their son, and anyway, so lots of feedback. Well, you never know. You never know. So we can't be political at Pelotonia. We invite everybody to participate. But I do know somebody who works for him who I think would really like for him to be in Granville on the Saturday of Pelotonia working the crowd because, you know, he's been to the event, he's seen it, he was excited to be here. So I don't think the Secret Service will let him ride his bike, but you never know. Yeah, exactly. One last plug. So if you're on the fence and thinking about riding, do it. But tonight the registration fee increases, and anybody who's here tonight who hasn't registered, who wants to register, I will give you a free registration code if you email me. So just an easy plug to get a couple more riders, because you can all do it. If you haven't done it, you should totally do it.
What's your email address?
dullman@pelotonia.org.
I mean, I see Ryan's writing it down. So
You're in.
He's always
in.
up for a deal.
I mean, you got to ride. You got to ride. If you do 25 miles, you'll think it was too short. If you do 45, you'll wish it was 35. I mean, it's just the way it goes, you know?
This is probably an opportune time for us to work in the fact that you can be a virtual rider. So if you truly do not want to get on a bike, but you still want to raise money and you still want to be part of the organization and the effort, you can be a virtual rider. Please help me thank Doug for joining us tonight.